Next, we'll be hearing from our CEO Roundtable. This morning, we are pleased to have with us a group of very talented leaders to share their perspective in the market and to tell us firsthand what it takes to build success in this environment from firsthand experiences. And we'll also hear their most pressing challenges and what they're doing to compete and best serve their customers. And serving as moderator of this panel is Paul Kirby. And Paul Kirby is the senior editor of TR Daily, who exclusively covers wireless issues. And Paul is not only very familiar with the industry, the wireless industry, he's also very familiar with CCA's policy issues and initiatives. So it's great to have him, and we're delighted that he was able to come out and join us in Las Vegas. So ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce Paul Kirby, and Paul Kirby will introduce his outstanding panel of experts. Here you go, Paul.
Why don't we have the panelists come up, if that's okay?
I think we're going to end up pretty far down the line.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. What we're going to do is I'm going to introduce our folks here, and then we'll start with the questions. And when we're done, we're going to leave it open for you all to ask questions if you like. I guess first of all, I just want to introduce who we have. Jim Hyde of nTelos was not able to come. He had a family emergency. We have John Foxman. He's president and CEO of MTPCS LLC. We have Ron Smith. He's president and CEO of Bluegrass Cellular. We have Doug Hutcheson. He's the president and CEO of Leap. And we have Pat Riordan. He's the president and CEO of Cellcom. And I guess I just wanted to open it all first for you all. Let me ask first, since Leap is involved in a transaction, I guess I wanted to get a sense for whether you're able to talk at all about it, and if your situation, you're currently in a situation where AT&T wants to buy you, if that shows that how difficult it is for the smaller players out there to kind of go it alone. I wanted to get your take on that first.
Well, I was hoping you'd ask me about that. We just filed our updated proxy yesterday, so I think all the things I have to say about the transaction are included in there, and look forward to working with the regulators and AT&T to get it completed over the coming months. So I don't have a lot of comments beyond that.
Is there, just not talking about the transaction specifically, is there any lessons for others in the challenges you faced in going it alone? Are there any lessons for others in what lessons they should learn in those difficulties?
Well, I actually thought the previous presentation highlighted, I think there's a lot of change coming in the industry. It's going to require, we're all in transitions from, it just seems not that long ago, from principally voice-based models to much different models, and it requires, I think, a lot of change in how we think about things. One interesting statistic on our side is that voice is soon, as far as total load on the network, will be going down into single-digit percentages. So that's a lot of change in a relatively short time period, and we all have to think about how we best position to, have an appropriate competitive position.
Mm-hmm. Now, interoperability is something folks have talked about at this whole conference. I wanted to get the takes of any of you all on the agreement that was reached recently with AT&T. And AT&T, in the agreement, can ask for an extension of 6 months if it faces difficulties deploying the software that they need. First, your reaction, if anyone wants to weigh in, and then if you think that it could take a little longer than 2 years for things to start.
I'll be happy to jump in. I think first, it's a great accomplishment when you think about where we were not too long ago with a lot of the people in this room having invested in that spectrum and not being able to use it. So it's a terrific accomplishment, but there's still a lot more to come. I think it just highlights the importance of the regulators and the role of the FCC in ensuring that what ultimately happens is consistent with what was agreed to here.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
I think it's a great first step. I mean, we certainly, probably even 30 to 60 days ago, were looking at the situation, and it looked a lot dimmer than I think it resulted in. And I think that's due again to the great hard work of Steve and the staff and the carriers that were involved, and certainly Acting Commissioner Clyburn rolling up her sleeves and putting people at the table and really doing as Steve has characterized, the old way of doing business, of making sure everybody stayed in the room until we finally came to a solution. I think it was a fantastic result compared to what we had expected. And while any agreement is certainly going to have to be worked through and verified and made sure that we do get the results that we hope come from it, having a voluntary agreement is certainly much better than having a regulatory imposition and having the resulting delays through legal results of that. So I think overall, I think we're pleased with the results, but certainly it's just a good first start.
Yeah, because if there was a mandatory, an order saying AT&T has to do this, and they appealed it,
Yeah.
fine, you'd have an order, but you might have years of court delays.
Yeah, and you go back to the same situation we have with data roaming. We've won the data roaming order, but the result is we still don't have data roaming. That's still being fought out in the courts, it's still being fought out in the marketplace. So again, industry solutions are always much better than regulatory imposition.
Did you want to?
I agree. I think the fact that we have got an industry solution bodes well for us going forward, because we need some more industry solutions. And to me, that step is huge. I mean, obviously, freeing band, the 700 A band is critical. You finally get all of the spectrum that's been laying there and not doing anything for anybody is finally going to be freed, and we're going to be able to change the industry, because now A is going to be in play. So, but the fact that it is an industry solution allows for the hope that we'll have other industry solutions, which the small carriers really need.
Now, devices is always a big issue. There's a panel after this on devices. A couple years ago, CCA pushed hard on handset exclusivity. That's not really the way it's termed anymore, because some of you all have iPhones, you have Samsung Galaxies for your customers, but it's still a big issue. And that was one of the issues, of course, with interoperability, is whether devices can roam. Give me a sense for how big an issue that still is for rural carriers. Are there still devices you would like but can't get? There's obviously a purchasing consortium that helps. Does anyone want to weigh in on that first?
Sure, I'll take a shot. I think it's a really big issue, lurking a little more in the shadows now than at other times in the past, but it's still out there. For a lot of us, we go back, and there have been multiple times in the history of the business where it's come up. When BlackBerry first came out, it was not available to small carriers. There were other devices that came out that weren't available to us, the iPhone for a long time. So even though the fact today that the iPhone is more available, and some of us have it and are able to sell it, there will be something else that comes out in the future. So I think if we're not as an industry and as an association diligent on that issue, the same thing's just going to happen again, and we ought to be concerned about that.
I think we have to recognize there's been a paradigm shift in the devices. Prior to Apple taking its approach that it's basically going to engineer a device a certain way, and the carriers are going to fit within that device, which with very little customization or in the firmware for specific carriers. Prior to that, almost every device was almost carrier specific in terms of the firmware load. And as we talk, if you go into the unlocking issue, you have the issue of, as long as you have customized by carrier firmware, unlocking becomes very problematic. But ultimately, the exclusivity issue became OEMs did not want to manufacture devices for small quantities for small carriers if there wasn't enough buying power behind it. As that paradigm is shifted, and we can see Samsung and HTC and the other carriers or other OEMs moving down a path very similar to what Apple has done in terms of saying, this is going to be my phone, and there's going to be very little carrier customization. Yes, there's going to have to be certain pieces of the firmware that are going to have to be specific to make sure that the phone works on your network. That eliminates a lot of the exclusivity issues, a lot of the barriers to our ability to get it, because in many cases the OEM said, hey, unless you can get 100,000 units, you're just not going to be able to afford it. It almost became beyond, yes, there was an exclusivity probably 2-3 years ago that there became an issue, but I think it became more a purchasing economics in the last few years. Mm-hmm. And I think that we've seen improvement in that. We've certainly seen it in some of our programs, where a year ago I didn't think we would have access to devices primarily because of purchasing power, because of those unique engineering issues, and I think we've seen some really good improvements on the OEM side on that.
And Doug, do you have anything, I guess, on the device issue? You have a larger carrier, but still you're not first in line, or haven't been over all the years for those iconic devices.
Yeah, I agree. We're at one of the time periods where maybe there's a little less pressure, but I think prospectively looking forward, you look at all of the bands of spectrum that are coming forward right now, and I know one of the things that's getting discussed a lot is the 600, but you look at it across low and mid band, there's 5-6 new pieces of spectrum that are figuring out how to get deployed over the next 4 or 5 years. And I think this issue is huge. So let's enjoy it, because I agree it's a little bit subsided right now, but it's a huge issue that's coming at the industry, at us, as we sit there and think about it. And even if there's a solution where they can get the number of fingers in the radio or whatever they need so that it operates, and we can get smaller volumes done, there's still a cost issue that goes along with it, that as these different pieces get involved in it, there's going to be cost drivers. So it's an area that is going to take a lot of work by this and other groups to work through, because I think we'll make progress and fall back several times as we move through it.
Now, regarding the iPhone, the other day, Apple announced a couple new versions. I mean, now they're looking at kind of different versions of the iPhone. Some are real new versions, some are just slightly upgrades. Do you think that's good going forward in terms of the rural carriers perhaps getting, when you have more available, if you will, more different kinds of iPhones out there?
I think it's a problem from the standpoint that what Apple has done is they really created 21 different phones that you really need to carry now. That's a different model for Apple. Apple, you basically had 2 phones, maybe 4 phones that you're looking at, but with the different colors, you really need to hold on to 21. That's a lot of phones to keep in inventory. So I think it's to that extent it's problematic. Going back to what we were talking about before, Ron's right that now the phones are more software driven as opposed to hardware driven. They're certainly more accessible to the small carriers. And I think that's going to continue. I think the call to us as small carriers is with the auction, especially the beachfront auction that's going to be coming up with 600 megahertz. We have to make sure we don't make the same mistake we made with the 700. This has got to be a single platformed auction where all phones can work on all of the 600. If we divide it like we did with 700, I think the small carrier is going to be sunk. I don't think we can handle it happening again. But I think if we're able to have it where all handsets work on all of the 600 megahertz, I think we have a good chance of being very relevant as it goes forward, because of the software changes to the handsets makes it much more economical for us to be able to get handsets in the future.
Now, another issue on devices is phone unlocking. There's legislation in Congress. In fact, Steve testified before Congress. NTIA yesterday asked the FCC to develop rules to allow consumers to unlock their phones and other devices. Does anyone want to weigh in on how important that issue is for smaller carriers?
Sure. I think it's really important. I think there's a little bit of a misconception with the paradigm for devices. Their being locked implies that there's somehow collateral in the relationship between the carrier and the customer. But I don't think that's the case at all. If the customer purchases a phone and is under contract, no matter what happens, they can't take that back and derive some value, some reduction in what they owe to that carrier. So it's a financial relationship between the customer and the carrier. The device purchased by the customer is the customer's property, and impairing their ability to get their value out of it seems to me to be the wrong direction. And the implications for competition, I think, are pretty significant as well. If customers make an investment in a device and can't take it and change carriers with it, you know, in a lot of cases, regardless of the financial relationship between them and the carrier or previous carrier, that's not the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
You know, I don't have any problem with unlocking phones. I think the consideration you got to take into mind is what is in that phone, and can it be unlocked? You know, how much of it is hardware driven to the point where it's really not, you really can't go to another carrier. So I think as the handsets become more software driven, I think unlocking is going to become much more simple and much more available to be able to be done. I certainly have no problem with that.
Now, another big issue this week is at the show is whether there should be spectrum aggregation limits on Verizon and AT&T in the incentive auction. Folks say, well, if there's not, the smaller guys will sit out and revenues will be down for the auction. I guess I wanted to get your general opinion on the limits, but then also, can you afford to sit out?
I want to rephrase your question.
Okay.
Now, we don't like that question.
Well, that's not the decision. I mean, that's not the critical element in a decision from my perspective of whether or not I participate in the auction. Aggregation limits address an issue that is important, but it's one of several issues that are important to us in the auction. The underlying issue for a carrier my size is whether or not the geographic areas that are being auctioned off are at a level that economically I can afford to participate. So if they're at EA levels where, you know, and I think we've had this discussion in a number of panels, but in my instance where I serve rural Kentucky between Louisville, Lexington, Nashville, if you go at EAs, I have to buy Louisville, Lexington, and Nashville, which is uneconomic for me. You know, historically, I've been able to get, you know, CMAs that were between those. If we don't find a solution set, and I know that, you know, we're working hard to do that either is a subset of the EAs or something that looks similar to the CMAs that allows a small carrier to economically participate, it doesn't matter about the other issues. And certainly, yes, spectrum aggregation is an important issue, but ultimately for a carrier my size, if you don't allow the spectrum to be auctioned at a geographic area small enough for me able to afford it, then I can't participate in any case.
The H-block rules, the basically are EAs, so I assume the H-block would be out for you all, and other smaller guys.
In my case, you know, EAs is just, you know, too problematic. There is not a value proposition, a business case that I could make to purchase an EA.
Is there a compromise in between, you think, perhaps, between the CMA and an EA that might work for the smaller guys and be agreeable to the bigger guys?
And those are the discussions we're having today. I think, you know, we're always open to trying to find some solution set that allows us to participate. And that's fundamentally what this is all about. We want everyone to participate in the auction. We don't want to exclude any carrier from the auction, but we're asking that in the process of developing the auction rules, that you allow everyone to participate. I just want to have a seat at the table. I'm not asking for anything other than allowing my carrier and carriers like my size to be able to participate, because we believe that that's going to be, number one, going to increase the revenues that are going to be produced. You know, historically, you know, look at the last auction 73. You know, sound like a broken record here, but auction 73, 33% of the auction was done at the CMA level, and it produced 48% of the revenues. So 33% at the CMA produced 48% of the revenues of the auction. And those are the basic economics that if you auction off at the smaller levels, government's going to get more revenue. it's going to be built out faster. The smaller carriers build out the rural areas faster than the big guys because that's our bread and butter. That's where we want to be. And customers ultimately, and it's all about customers being served, getting LTE out, getting broadband out as quickly as possible. It gets done if you do it at the CMA level. But if you exclude the smaller participants, you exclude new participants because there's a lot of other small parties that would probably, in a small geographic level, look at an opportunity for a business plan for broadband, fixed broadband, or some solution set that might be in a municipality. But if you're building at an EA level, those participants aren't going to participate. So I'm just saying, I think for good public policy is you want to have as many people involved. And those historic players like ourselves, I think we'd like to be at the table.
Now,
And I agree with that. And
Sure.
I think Ron hit it right in the head. But I think the compromise should be that all spectrum auctioned should be at the CMA level. To me, that's a compromise.
all auctions,
All auctions,
all the licenses and
all the
auctions?
licenses.
Okay.
Because guess what? The big guys really do have enough money to actually buy those. And that does allow the small carriers, and it allows anyone to actually participate. As soon as you start packaging, and as soon as we start talking about a compromise, the packaging lends itself to the big guys that they can still crush us because they can take the small area that Ron might want or we may want, and it's a rural area, and they can package it so that even though we may have the top bid for that, if it's packaged, they can still take it away because they're bidding on, in my case, the Milwaukee area, which I have no interest in. I have no desire in, but just like Ron's saying, I would have to bid on that if it was an EA. And I don't have any customers there. I don't have a desire for any customers there. And I don't serve it as well as other people, the larger companies can, but they can't outserve me in the small areas. So it's the best of both worlds just to make this thing just CMAs, period. And to me, for the big guys to say that they can't bid in CAs makes absolutely no sense.
Now, in the incentive auction is going to be like any other auction, unlike any other auction, because they want to try to have the same size geographic areas, so they're fungible. So that the large guys say, yeah, that could create 5,000 licenses if you do CMAs, and that's kind of complicated, but you're saying they have the resources to bid on all those if they want them.
Yeah, really complicated? If we can handle it, they probably can handle it. I really think that this is not too complicated for Verizon. It's not too complicated for the FCC. They could do this if they wanted to. I think it's simpler for the FCC to have smaller licenses, but they're going to get less money. We're going to have less diversity, and we're not going to have as good a system for our customers. And to me, to Ron's point, that's what it's all about.
I agree with Pat. I mean, saying it's complicated is a pretty poor excuse for not making the best public policy choice.
Now, other issues that smaller players have weighed in on against for the H block and incentive auction are anonymous bidding, package bidding. Anyone want to mention why those are problematic, particularly for smaller providers?
I've already commented on packaging.
Right.
I think that's really problematic.
The anonymous, that's something in particular smaller people in historically have opposed, as opposed to some of the larger players.
Sure, we oppose that, a strong feeling. I tell you what, I'll trade it. They can have that. They can have anonymous. Let's go CMAs. We got a deal.
Well, then we're good then.
You're the grand negotiator.
I know. That's it.
You got it.
So there's a broader proceeding, not just incentive auction, a spectrum holdings proceeding that's looking at spectrum aggregation, the spectrum screen, that type of thing. CCA and others have pushed for the FCC to update its screen and impose general aggregation limits to prevent AT&T and Verizon from getting too much spectrum. Does anyone, it's related obviously in a way to the incentive auction because we've talked so much about that issue in the incentive auction. Does anyone want to weigh more broadly on that proceeding about why there's a need for some limits there, just going forward in general? No? Okay. Something that's near and dear to wireless hearts is the Universal Service Fund. Many carriers are not pleased with the way the FCC has structured the Connect America Fund and the Mobility Fund. I know Steve said, John, in particular, you're concerned about it. Give us a sense for what they've done wrong and what they should do to repair what they've done.
Sure. I think the starting point is it a valid and valuable program? And I think very strongly that it is. It's helped our company, and I know a lot of others, bring wireless services to parts of the nation that didn't have it before. And that was the policy objective. So to me, the original conception of it made a lot of sense. It got off the track in a few different ways. When they provided a waiver on portability that caused the fund to grow, that seemed to be the lightning rod for a lot of criticism. At the end of the day, you look at what has happened with the USF reform, and the dollars to the wireless industry have been reduced significantly. So now you have a situation where the wireless industry pays almost half of the dollars into the fund, about 44%, but takes out, with the implementation of this reform, about 10 or 12%. That doesn't seem to me to really fit the objective of providing service to rural communities and rural consumers who have I think a pretty obvious need for the benefits of what it can provide. I think another good example, where you can see what's wrong with the current program is, if you look at the 901 auction, what went on, the FCC identified a little over 14,200 areas, biddable areas, where they said there's a need for broadband service here, and this program is designed to help willing carriers deliver service to those areas. But in fact, only about 5% of those areas won. So coming out the other side of that auction process, 95% of the areas where the FCC said there's a need here, and we have a policy initiative and a program to try to address that, didn't get addressed. And so again, you go back to the scale of the dollars, a $300 million annual fund out of what's been a $4+ billion program. That's it to accomplish the goal of bringing
So more money is
service?
needed first.
I think more money is absolutely needed.
Yeah. Is there just a lot of politics involved? Obviously, you have rural telcos that have a revenue stream they want to preserve. You have some large telcos who might be interested. What do you do to correct things realistically in Washington?
I think if I could pick two things, I'd suggest number one, just a clean separation. Let's look at wireless on its own instead of mixing in with a bunch of other things, mixing in with the wireline side, having it managed at the FCC kind of jointly, and having different sides compete over the policy benefits of one versus the other. I think wireless has really lost out in that kind of landscape. So let's look at wireless on its own, have a public policy debate and a program debate with the FCC about the benefits of providing wireless. And I would match that up. A second thing is to say, if wireless contributes over $7 billion into the fund, how about letting wireless take out even half, just half of what it puts in to devote toward bringing service to unserved areas. I think those two changes alone would make a big difference. It would provide for more money. It would let us make our case to regulators and policymakers over the benefits, and I think wireless would really benefit from that.
Okay. Does anyone else want to weigh in on USF? We have, I have more questions, but I want to see, we have a mic around here roving around, and can you raise your hands if you'd like to ask any questions of our CEOs? No? No questions? A big issue in Washington right now is FirstNet. The First Responder Network Authority is planning a nationwide public safety broadband network, and they've made a point of saying they want to have public-private partnerships, and they can't build it alone with $7 billion, which is what they have. Give me a sense, if you all could, on what role you think the rural carriers can and should play with FirstNet.
I think the issues with FirstNet is that because they're going through a revolving rulemaking and internally in terms of how they're going to use the funds and working with individual states, if I understand the way the FirstNet works, each individual state is actually going to be taking control of the money and deciding how they're going to be building out each of the networks. So you have the complexity of that each of the public service commissions within each of the states are going to make that determination. So I think, how we try to interface with FirstNet at a national level versus a regional or state level, I think is where we're still trying to understand where that dynamic lays. And ultimately, it's going to be their network. I mean, you want to make sure that that network is going to be providing the services that they need and not getting complicated out. We certainly would love to be participative in terms of making sure that the quality of that network is established, and if we have infrastructure that we can work with them in terms of using that would be great. But I think the dialogue at the levels that need to take place probably have not yet been defined.
Do the rest of you agree? Have you had any dialogue with either folks from FirstNet or what are called the state points of contact in each state, in your states by any chance?
We have,
Yeah.
and Ron's right. I mean, we talk about politics. I would like to believe, I'd like to be optimistic that this is all going to come together. I haven't the faintest idea how that could happen. So I tend to be a little more pessimistic. We're more than happy to, and we propose some things. This has got a long, long ways to go, and there's just so much that needs to be defined, and we don't seem to see anybody who's really standing up and defining it as well as it needs to be. There's just a lot more work that needs to be done, and we'll see what happens. But I think to the point, I think there is certainly a lot of rural carriers that are very interested in participating and would be glad to work with their network and help to make it happen. It's just that there's so much in the way of politics involved in this thing. It's just hard to imagine how it's going to happen.
Okay. I think we have a question over here. Oh, sorry. Lucy's coming.
I waited till you got over to the other side of the room. It's Howard Buskirk with Communications Daily. I just had a question. One thing that we haven't heard a lot about at this conference, which is interesting given what's going on in Washington, is that there hasn't been a whole lot of talk about government spectrum and spectrum sharing and the work that the Commerce Spectrum Advisory Committee has been doing on spectrum sharing. My question for the CEOs this morning is that something where there's too many complexities that's not something that you guys think is going to be a really viable alternative for smaller carriers? I mean, I'm just wondering, where are you looking at that? Where do you come down on that one?
Well, there is not a real strong interest in that. I think as soon as you start putting limitations on the spectrum you can use, you're going to run into problems. I mean, if you're going to say that you can use it all except for this center piece, and you don't have that center piece, then it's just a workaround, and it's very difficult to see how you're going to be able to work that. Are you going to be able to use it from 7 a.m. till 5:15? I mean, there are too many obstacles, I think, right now, at least for rural carriers, to really jump on the bandwagon and say, what a great idea. We really need unencumbered spectrum in order to make plans and be able to serve our public properly.
I think it's an idea that is too early in its discussion to be able to get a sense of whether or not you really have something that's you're going to be able to deal with. I mean, currently today, the spectrum crunch in the rural areas isn't at the level that it is in the urban areas with the tier ones. And so I think certainly spectrum sharing as a alternative is probably maybe more important to them as they see their needs, and certainly looking to see how the 600 megahertz auction occurs and who are the winners and losers may determine whether or not there's a party out of that will move toward that faster. I think the evolution of LTE Advanced, our ability to use disparate spectrum bands and bring it together into one pipe, seeing how spectrum sharing could fit into that paradigm. Again, still good questions that we need to ask. So we certainly aren't saying that it isn't something we want to make sure that we have as an alternative looking forward, But in terms of our areas, our need for a capacity issue, probably it's way too soon. Maybe on a tier 1 level, it's maybe more important. But I think you're probably going to see more activity after the 600 megahertz auction as you see some certainty of saying, okay, there's nothing coming down the pike anymore. Something else is going to have to occur if there truly is a spectrum crunch out there, and spectrum sharing becomes a much higher priority at that point in time, I believe.
It's interesting you say that you all don't have the same crunch as the urban areas. Some of the government spectrum, the folks like to say, is they might have nationwide assignments, the Department of Defense, but they might not be using it in the middle of a rural area where you guys are. But so, as you said, though, there's it's a little difficult to figure out how to share that spectrum, how to say, okay, are we sharing based on time? Are we sharing based on geography? Do we have to use dynamic spectrum access to try to go back and forth and see if a channel is open and if it's not open? And the large carriers are having problems with those questions, and they're in those meetings at the CSMAC, and so I guess we'll just have to see. We have a question right here from, do you want to?
It may not be fair for me to ask the question.
It's not.
All right, you can, we don't know you, you can sit down.
I asked the question especially this group, because we've got 2 carriers in the United States that own 76 to 80% of the low-band spectrum below 1 gig. 2 carriers own 67 to 74% of all customers in the United States. They own almost 80% of EBITDA or revenue in the wireless world. What do the small carriers have to do to help anticipate how they can stay and grow? Do they have to think more collectively? Do they have to think more sharing? How can they stay competitive and take back a few of those numbers, especially the EBITDA, the revenue, from the largest carriers in a competitive market? And what are some of the things that will make a difference to you? And I know that, Doug, this is something that you've had a lot to say in the previously, and I don't want to put you on the spot on, because you have a very important deal going, but this is philosophically, how do small carriers think of the marketplace to retain a competitive opportunity?
And also I want to go back to the previous presentation. One of the things that we talked about was network sharing. And I think there were some discussions here yesterday about collaboration. The foundation on the network, what you do, is certainly an area that everyone needs to look at really hard right now. How do you optimize the resources? Beyond that, there's a lot of different, each company has its own unique situation. And I don't know that I'm the right one to pass what the right strategy is, so I'll let perhaps others comment on that.
You've got a couple of different things going on in what you presented. One, you started talking about the fact that we've got 2 carriers that dominate. We all know that. I've heard that once or twice before. But I think the other question you asked is I think it really comes down to how do we compete. And I think the way the small carriers compete is the way they've always competed, is we have to provide exceptional service in the local area. We have to provide coverage that's exceptional in the local area. We have to be able to outperform our larger brethren in the local area, because that's what we own. And we also have to provide very good national and international service to our customers, because that's what they're looking for. And I think if we do those things, I think we can compete very well. I think we'll be able to do that. We need to be able to obviously get our hands on devices. We need to have enough spectrum, and we need to have the right type of spectrum. So all those things are the things that we're fighting for. When this comes to this beachfront property, that's one of the reasons why we are so vocal about the fact that we cannot afford, and we don't think the nation can really afford, to have these licenses in EA. The size are just too big. If all you're really interested in having 2 or 3 companies and higher prices to the customers, that's a good way to do it, but you're also going to degrade the service along the way. If you're interested in making sure you have the best service, which I think the United States is really interested in, and making sure that all customers, rural customers and city customers, have the best possible service they can have, we need to have these auctions in a way that allows all of the carriers to participate. And that really gets down to CAs. And we haven't really made a big deal out of the fact that, how much spectrum can they have? Do we Do we say that they have to stop at a certain point? There's probably some reason to say that they've got enough spectrum. I don't think we're really going after that, because it's really a matter of saying, hey, look, we just want an equal chance at being able to get the spectrum we need so that we can serve our population the best we were able to do it, and that's what we're really after. And I think we've done a good job in the past. We'll continue to do that if we're given the chance.
And just to pile on, I completely agree with Pat about the really important thing in upcoming auctions. If the carriers of this association are closed out of participating because the rules are structured in a way that makes it unavailable to us, if the situation's bad now, just wait. It's going to be completely untenable. So if we can be in a fair footing at the beginning, have the opportunity to acquire spectrum, and then do our jobs, which is different a little bit in each market, but compete effectively, run a good business, satisfy our customers, then we'll have healthy carriers and a healthy industry.
We need roaming. And right now, within the CCA, there's probably not more than 15 to 20 carriers that have LTE roaming with a Tier 1. And the ecosystem efforts that we've done at the CCA level to try to ensure that all small carriers have access to nationwide 4G data roaming is extraordinarily important. And commend the staff and the board for sort of setting that as a high priority in the past, and it needs to continue to be so. And we need to continue to work with all the Tier 1s to find a way to make sure that we have a very vibrant, competitive broadband industry. And today, we still have a very siloed approach. There are some breaks in that are occurring, some good discussions that are occurring. But ultimately, as we look down toward VoLTE-only handsets in the near future, if carriers are still looking at being legacy 3G providers, and the handsets go away, and you're all of a sudden looking at VoLTE-only, there's only a couple of year window here. So I think we have a challenge as an industry to make sure that those ecosystems are being developed, and we have a challenge working with the device manufacturers to make sure that as long as those legacy systems are out there, that we try and make sure that those are being incorporated into the devices.
As you know, the appeals court in Washington upheld the FCC's data roaming rules. So why are there not more than 15 or 20 agreements among CCA members?
Yeah, Ron, why not?
So are they still, are AT&T and Verizon still, is there still a lot of question, because the rules obviously allow commercially reasonable terms, but allow specific terms. So that's still the question, right? What's reasonable?
Yeah, and I think the LTE fragmentation, the disaster of the 700 megahertz auction and the balkanization of those spectrum bands was critical in causing those Tier 1s to be able to establish unique band plans that, under the data roaming rules, you have to be technologically consistent. You have to be able to go in there and say, okay, I can go into your network with a band class 17 device and interact. And if the only people that have band class 17 devices in the network are AT&T, there's no way the data roaming rules work. So ultimately, until we have devices that can go across multiple bands, that we have networks. I have a band class 12 network today, but it's lower band B. I could be band class 17 tomorrow, but I don't have access to mobility devices at band class 17 to make a business case. So yeah, I could approach AT&T tomorrow and say, hey, if I turned up my network, turned it over from band class 12 to band class 17, and go to them with the data roaming rules. But the reality from a business case is I don't have a device on the band class 17 side.
So once the interoperability agreement is once it's in place, the agreement has been reached, but once there's actually interoperability, the rural guys can go to AT&T and say, okay, we want roaming. And if AT&T says, okay, these terms, and you think they're bad, then the FCC can rule case by case on whether that's commercially reasonable. But that's got to get in place first, because you're not compatible technologically. Okay. Right. We're almost running out of time. Did you have a question? We have a question right here, the microphone.
So going back to the universal service issue for a minute, it's been framed occasionally as a wireless versus wireline issue, but isn't the real result of the reform showing us that it was sort of a smaller carrier versus a larger carrier issue? Because I think the companies that lost out in that last set of reforms were not the larger carriers. Maybe if there's a paradigm shift, to use today's catchphrase, we need a reframing of it as, shouldn't we be all sort of working together to ensure that the rural broadband outreach funding of all small carriers can grow, and to the extent that might unfortunately impact price cap carriers, obviously that's a very important consideration for everyone, but perhaps the FCC can review it in a way that might assist all of the smaller carriers, including those that do have RLEC affiliates. There are many of those in this room, and we've seen in our Montana experience that working together, the smaller carriers, wireless and wireline, can have a good impact. I wonder if anyone would be interested in commenting on that.
Well, for full disclosure, I probably shouldn't contact since we work together.
It's
not a setup
I'm the
question.
general counsel at
That sounds like a
MTPCS.
setup.
Just tell her that's a wonderful question.
It's a great question. Thank you, Julia. No, I would say in fairness, my response to that is yes, I think there's probably merit to that. The point I was trying to make, and what I believe is that there's a separate policy debate and discussion to be had that relates to wireless, and I think the purer that discussion is, the better the thought process, and I hope the better the outcome would be. So either is better than where we are today.
But I would say that your point that in many cases this is a small carrier versus a large carrier issue is correct, but not just only in the USF environment. I mean, as you go back to the CMA issue, NTCA and CCA signed a joint letter promoting CMAs, and it wasn't a wireless versus wireline. It was small carriers coming together saying, this is what we believe is the best competitive environment to create, and I think that's exactly so.
We are almost out of time. Are there any other questions? Let me just ask, I'm not going to say I'll go down the line because I didn't tell you I was going to ask this, but are there any sleeper issues we haven't discussed? I sometimes hear moderators ask that and I think, oh, that's kind of dumb, but not a bad question. Are there any sleeper issues that we haven't discussed here this week that you think we should be looking out for in the next year or so, or two? If not, that's fine.
Sure. I think one of the big issues that really hasn't been discussed, and Vish went over it quite a bit actually in his presentation, is that we have to make sure we're not just viewing ourselves as wireless carriers. We have to take a look at the network. We have to understand what is the next step. I think if we get caught up in the fact that we're strictly wireless carriers, we're in the same boat that, some of us were ILECs, that we were just landline carriers. We're not just landline carriers. We're not just wireless carriers. We have to provide the services that our customers want. We have to be open to, what does the cloud offer us? We have to be looking at the next step, and if we ignore that, we're risking the possibility of becoming obsolete. So I would just say that would be, I don't know that it's a sleeper issue, but to me it's a huge issue, and we're looking at that right now.
Please join me in thanking our panelists. Well done, guys.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you so much for moderating, Paul. Appreciate it. And again, thank you to our panelists, Ron and Pat and Jonathan and Doug. Thank you. Appreciate it. Next up, we have another good group of panelists. We'll discuss some issues called devices, an issue that's primary to all consumers, primary to all carriers who serve them. And I'm very eager to learn and hear from these three experts and what they have to say. To moderate this roundtable as they set up reset the stage, to moderate the roundtable on the mobile device landscape will be Jeff Mucci. And Jeff is CEO and editorial director for RCR Wireless. our live stream partner. Jeff has been covering wireless issues for many years, and we're certainly happy to have him here today at CCA. And Jeff, I think, okay, Jeff's already up here. We'll get the panelists here. We'll start in just about 1 minute.